chemical activity with the brain, vibration that could communicate our thought with another people only with the vibration of the ether that, or some that the ether that arrives to the other person. So we can continue to speak so without words.
And sometimes this will come up. The one time I ever called into a radio show, back.
Did you win?
No. It wasn't that kind of radio show.
No.
I was driving to work on a Saturday morning back when I was working in medicine. I was very grumpy to be going off to this 24-hour shift. And there was this guy on the radio show who was some kind of energy healer. And he was making claims about how he could do this. And so I was in a cranky mood, so I called in. And trying to figure out, would he acknowledge any limits to what he could do? And he eventually got to the point where he explained that he could, didn't matter where he was, he could be in Japan. And if I, or in Darwin, dealing with his digestive troubles, was somehow able to communicate with him and telephone would work, he would then be able to send healing energies through, I don't know what word he used, but through the ether from Japan to Darwin in England or to me in Boston and cure what was wrong with me. And so what my thought was, based on physics problems, ideas of physics, well, if you have a source and your energy is radiating out from there, he would have to be emitting so much power to be able to have some influence on me 12,000 miles away. And he said, you just don't understand how this works. So the problem was my knowledge of physics, not his knowledge of the healing energy.
Indeed, Tesla tried to do tried to create a machine that was able to send unlimited power from one place to another. He thought it was possible to give power to a car or to a plane everywhere in the world only with light or electromagnetism, right, or with vibration of the heater that could transmit unlimited power. They also create matter. More funny, maybe.
Can we resurrect Tesla?
Well, there are people at MIT who are trying. The founders great. One of the ideas is, can you generate a receiver of electromagnetic energy that is so sensitive that that it could charge itself just from the ambient energy? And again, it sounds very much like these 19th century theories, but there are labs where they are trying very much to do this. And the minute they can and patent it, they'll be very excited.
So yes, we can resurrect Nikola Tesla. Corollary to that question, we resurrect Nikola Tesla. We resurrect Darwin. Who would win in a fight? Why? 150 words or less.
I don't know why you're resurrecting bloody Darwin. Can't we resurrect Wallace?
I knew that would get him. I knew that would get him.
Wallace would win. Wallace? Look, he's a macho field biologist. He's spent 12 years literally in the jungle. Okay,
wrestling an orangutan.
Wrestling orangutans, wrestling all sorts of things. You name it, he's wrestled it. Okay, not yet Tesla. It's true, but he's getting there. True, he's a big bloke. She was over 6 foot tall, and he claimed he couldn't swim because his legs were too long and heavy. So I just have this vision of him going into the fight with Tesla, sort of kicking.
All right, I'm going to add to this. They're in a partially submerged glass cage. It's glass. It's strong enough to carry the water, carry the weight of Wallace. Sorry, even I can't say. It's like I've got autocorrect on my tongue. Wallace, partially submerged glass tank, so we can view this. So it's awesome. And it won't break.
You mean like the penguins at SeaWorld? Or something?
Why not? Yeah. This is like this. I want an academic Thunderdome between these two guys, right? Nikola Tesla not using his robotic suit that he's known for, by the way.
What about the death ray?
Shh.
If
we give that away, he's already going to get the jump on him. He's going to watch him when he's loading his death ray. Okay, death ray is now out in this situation.
Himself.
Nikola Tesla, Wallace, man-to-man, partially submerged tank of water. We know he's got the heavy legs.
Well, which is actually going to be useful because it's partially, we don't want him sort of drifting away or anything.
Well, so if on the subject of resurrection, so the person who was given the most credit for developing phrenology, Franz Gall, was a German scientist. One of his most famous students, Johann Spurzheim, came to the United States to spread the faith of phrenology and had the misfortune to die while he was here in Boston and is actually buried in the Mount Auburn Cemetery. And so if we wanted to resurrect him, we have the remains.
I see it. I see him. I see him. I see him.
Right now.
Next year at Cambridge Science Festival, three-way cage match.
Resurrection will be on day one, and then the second day will be there.
We're going to suspend them. We're going to make this a little more dangerous. Suspended off the ground in an ether cage.
Yeah.
How do you like that? Ether cage ladder match between the three greatest minds. You're welcome. I'm already doing your PR for next year.
Yeah.
Let's assume that there's a world, a political world, and an economic world that depends on science or academics to guide its directive. And let's assume that we've got phrenology is working. Well, that's going to allow us to say certain people are losers, and if they just happen to be a different color, that's even better. I mean, we can create a whole, we can call it apartheid. And we can say there's a justification that makes it so we can organize society around a certain sort of physical resemblance. Or let's say it's Darwin. Well, gee, we could organize our life in such a way that those people that are the fittest and the strongest that should survive, well, let's call them Aryan or whoever. I mean, there's a kind of science that could be a world that could be built around this science, and that's the what if question that I think probably deserves a lot of humor and your attention.
So in terms of phrenology, an inspired phrenologist would say that their system would have been prophylaxis against that. Because in the absence of a way to scientifically evaluate the worth of different individuals or different sorts of people, then what happened is society fell back on these superficial distinctions, skin color, other sorts of things. And if people could have really judged others well, then surely a rational society would have fallen back on a good way of judging people through these phrenological exams. You can imagine how it would play out in politics today. Now we're in the midst of this process. That people throughout the country are contributing. I guess the estimate now is there'll be $2 billion to the candidates, who will then turn that over to the TV networks to fill our TV viewing with advertisements. You can say, well, that doesn't make sense. Wouldn't it be so much better if you could just bring the two people in, have a panel of phrenology experts, and figure out who's going to be the most reliable, who's going to be the most creative? If you were to carry this out, you would wonder, if you compare if you compare the skulls of the two candidates, you can't do that because Mitt Romney is hiding something under that head of hair. Barack Obama, whatever you think of him, has been very forthright in displaying his phrenological value for his whole presidency. And Romney feels the need to carefully coif his hair. He clearly has something to hide.
And on the social Darwinism side of things and the eugenics side of things, this is one of the joys of Wallaceism. Wallace, as I've described, was absolutely a die-hard socialist. So any kind of totalitarian intervention was to him deeply offensive. Also, he lived long enough to actually witness the great growth in the eugenic movement, which was partly a response to evolutionary writings, this concern that human society, especially Victorian society, was sliding backwards. All the right people were having rather few offspring, and all the wrong people were having too many offspring. Wallace actually commented on this. He was extremely offended by the notion that what he called a scientific priestcraft, i.e., again, this is authoritarian, should determine who should and who should not have offspring. He had an interesting theory about he was a very utopian thinker, had an interesting theory about the improvement of society, which he attributed, in a sense, it's a borrowed version of Darwin's theory of sexual selection, which is many of the of society's ills, other than the fact that land has not been nationalized and is entirely owned by the government. That's one. The other one is, and he was ridiculously progressive about this, he felt women were oppressed for some reason in the late Victorian era. And he felt that women made poor reproductive decisions because of that oppression. Basically, you apparently, this was his vision of what Victorian women did, you jumped at the first thing in trousers just in order to get out of the miserable state of servitude or whatever you were living in at home. So what he envisaged was not a eugenic world. Yes, he wanted to improve the planet in breeding terms, but not through eugenics, but through the liberation of women and permitting them, instead of leaping at the first thing in trousers, as my wife did many years ago, actually exercising genuine choice. So, in a sense, that would have a eugenic outcome in that all the sad sacks who their only claim to fame is a pair of trousers wouldn't get a look in reproductively, and, quote, the better genes would. So, as I say, in a sense, all your fears of eugenics and the like are obviated by the fact that Darwin never took that voyage on the Beagle.
As a grand sort of unifying theory, what about the idea that certain sort of awareness of ether and ability to manipulate it, which may be indicative of consciousness, being in some way neurological and therefore detectable by phrenology?
There's a lot of assumptions here. So, as I said earlier,
this is what if.
So, if you were a phrenologist who was going to deal with the ether and spirituality, you'd have to assume that there was some part of the brain, some organ of the brain, had the capacity to detect these things. And then the question would be, what would you do to enhance those abilities? Could you train them? Could you cultivate them through appropriate breeding choices? It'd be easy to explain why these things would have existed through natural selection. Clearly, if this ether was a force that was out there that we could interact with, a group of creatures who had the ability to do so well would be selected for over time. So you could imagine how you'd be able to explain it if it worked. It's just so hard to imagine what would actually be involved in doing that because we haven't figured it out yet.
Right, but who would win if it was Tesla's robots versus Wallace's mutant monsters?
Again, this is fairly straightforward.
Setting is important. So, setting is very important. There's no follow-up on.
Was that it? That was the.
No.
That's all I have to say.
Yes.
The idea of having direct communication through the ether, through brainwaves or vibrations or whatever, how would current language differences come into effect in terms of, different languages around the world? Would we all think the same way, or do brainwaves, are they consistent regardless of language? Yeah. Indeed, I think that there were more different languages if the ether or the possibility to communicate with brains, between brains with the ether, there were more need of the different languages. There were more need to learn different languages because I think that the image will arrive directly from one people to another. So the concept that is before the formation of the word, of the sentence, I think.
And one thing that would be tricky about that, for those of you, unlike me, who are fluent in multiple languages, people who are really good will say, well, they can actually think in different languages. And then presumably, if your thoughts are being broadcast through the ether, you could potentially be broadcasting in different languages. Which raises the situation, what would happen in a room like this, where we were all sort of broadcasting our thoughts? Would you then just be receiving a cacophony of thoughts